Picture a small town in Illinois, 1812, where the world felt untouched by time. Willow Creek was a scattering of log cabins and dirt paths, cradled by dense woods that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The air carried the scent of damp moss and chimney smoke, life moving to the rhythm of creaking wagon wheels and distant church bells. Families toiled under open skies, their children chasing fireflies as dusk painted the horizon red. But one crisp autumn morning, a shadow crept into this quiet place. A new family, the Graysons, arrived without fanfare, their wagon rattling down the rutted road. They spoke of building a schoolhouse, a gift to the town, a place to shape young minds with knowledge and faith. The townsfolk, hungry for progress, welcomed the idea. Education was a rare jewel on the frontier, and the promise of a school felt like a blessing. Yet, as the wooden structure rose deep in the woods, far from the town's heart, unease began to stir. The schoolhouse stood alone, its weathered planks looking older than they should, as if the forest itself had birthed it. No children's laughter spilled from its windows. No games of tag filled its yard. Instead, a heavy silence draped the place, thick as fog, broken only by the groan of locked doors or the rustle of leaves skittering across the ground. The townsfolk noticed other oddities. The Graysons kept to themselves, their faces stern, their eyes sharp as flint. Elijah Grayson, the patriarch, was a towering figure with a voice like thunder, quoting scripture to anyone who lingered too long. His family, wife and grown children, moved with a strange precision, their smiles tight, their gazes cold. Parents dropped their children at the school each morning, watching them vanish behind those heavy doors. The little ones returned quieter than before, their chatter replaced by glances over their shoulders as if something unseen followed them home. Neighbors whispered over fences, their voices low. "It's too quiet," one said, staring at the path to the woods. "No school should be that still." Another spoke of hearing strange chants at night, drifting from the trees like a hymn gone wrong. The townsfolk tried to shrug it off. After all, the Graysons were godly people, weren't they? They attended church, shared their harvest, and spoke of saving souls. But doubts gnawed at their trust. A farmer passing by at dusk swore he saw a flicker of light in the school's windows long after lessons should have ended. A hunter claimed the wolves avoided that stretch of forest, their howls falling silent near the school's clearing. Children began to speak in hushed tones of rules they couldn't explain, their small hands trembling as they clutched their slates. One mother noticed her son's shoes, caked with mud that smelled of decay, though the schoolyard was dry. Questions piled up unanswered. Why were the doors always locked? Why did the Graysons watch the town with such piercing stares, as if guarding a secret no one dared to name? Parents hesitated at the school's threshold, their hearts heavy with a fear they couldn't voice. Willow Creek was a town built on faith and community, but something about that schoolhouse felt wrong, like a stain spreading across a clean cloth. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the truth began to claw its way to the surface, hinting at a darkness far worse than anyone could imagine. That darkness had a name: the Graysons. To the people of Willow Creek, they were a family, a virtue, their lives a mirror of frontier piety. Elijah Grayson stood at the center, a man whose presence filled a room like smoke. His beard was tangled as briars, his voice a deep rumble that could silence a crowd with a single verse from Leviticus. His wife Abigail was a vision of restraint, her apron crisp, her eyes always downcast, as if hiding a storm within. Their 3 grown children, Harlan and Silas, broad-shouldered brothers with hands calloused from work, and Eliza, a wisp of a girl with raven hair, completed the picture of a devout clan. They greeted neighbors with nods, donated apples to the poor, and knelt in the front pew every Sunday. But behind the walls of their log cabin nestled beside the schoolhouse, the mask slipped. The Grayson home was no sanctuary. It was a crucible where cruelty was forged in secret. Elijah ruled with a ferocity that left no room for defiance. His discipline wasn't just strict, it was brutal. A spilled glass at dinner could earn a lash from his belt, the leather snapping like a whip. Abigail, So gentle in public, enforced his will with a quieter venom. She'd lock the children in their rooms for hours, whispering through the door about sin and shame until their sobs grew faint. Harlan and Silas, now in their 20s, had learned their father's ways too well. They turned sibling spats into violent contests, pinning each other down in the dirt behind the house, their laughter edged with malice. Eliza, the youngest at 19, was different, silent, watchful, her eyes like dark pools reflecting the family's sins. She moved through the house like a ghost, obeying without question, her hands trembling as she served meals. The family's evenings were tense, the air thick with unspoken rules. A wrong glance could shatter the silence, plates crashing against walls, shouts muffled to avoid prying ears. Neighbors never heard the chaos, only saw the Graysons' polished exterior. The next morning, yet cracks in that facade began to show. A townsman delivering firewood caught a glimpse through a window. Abigail's face twisted in anger, her hand raised over Eliza. A child's slate, dropped in the schoolyard, bore strange markings, not lessons, but symbols scratched in fear. The family's piety, once a shield, started to feel like a performance. Elijah's sermons grew harsher, warning of divine wrath for those who questioned authority. Abigail's charity came with strings, her gifts paired with pointed reminders of loyalty. Harlan and Silas began lingering in town, their presence looming like storm clouds, silencing gossip with a glance. The schoolhouse, their domain, became an extension of this control. What happened within its walls wasn't education. It was something far darker, a twisted reflection of the family's own warped dynamic. The children who entered each morning weren't just students. They were pawns in a game only the Graysons understood. As winter loomed, the town's unease deepened, whispers growing louder about what lay beneath the family's holy veneer. The school, meant to enlighten, was becoming a place where innocence went to die. Each morning, the children of Willow Creek trudged through the frost-kissed woods to the schoolhouse, their breath puffing in the chilly air. They carried slates and dreams of learning, expecting lessons in numbers and letters. Instead, they stepped into a nightmare disguised as education. The schoolroom was stark, its walls bare save for a single cross above Elijah Grayson's desk. The air smelled of damp wood and something sharper like iron. Elijah stood at the front, his ruler a scepter of authority, his eyes scanning for weakness. "Knowledge is obedience," he'd say, his voice echoing like a sermon in a crypt. But obedience came at a cost. A stumbled recitation earned a crack across the knuckles, the ruler's edge biting into soft skin. A whisper between classmates brought a swift backhand, the sound sharp enough to hush the room. Abigail taught the girls separately, her lessons steeped in moral rigidity. She'd force them to kneel for hours, reciting prayers until their knees bled, her soft voice weaving tales of eternal punishment for disobedience. Harlan and Silas patrolled, the rows like wolves, their boots thudding against the floorboards. A boy caught doodling felt Harlan's grip, his arm twisted until he gasped. Silas, quieter but no less cruel, favored humiliation, making children stand in corners, faces to the wall, for hours. Lunch was a privilege, not a right. Those who faltered in their studies went hungry, their empty stomachs growling as others ate under the Graysons' watchful eyes. But the true terror came after hours, in what the family called special sessions. These were reserved for the troubled children, those who questioned, who cried, who dared to resist. The schoolhouse doors locked at dusk, and the woods swallowed the screams. Little Tommy Hale, a bright-eyed boy of 9, was sent to one such session after forgetting a verse. He returned with burns on his arms, the Graysons claiming he'd fallen, near the hearth. Sarah Jenkins, a timid girl, spoke of a closet where she was locked for hours, the darkness pressing in until she begged for mercy. Then the disappearances began. First, it was the orphans, children with no one to notice their absence. Their desks sat empty, their names erased from the roster. "Runaways," Elijah would say, his tone final. Parents of other missing children received notes, sent to kin for better care. But the excuses grew thin. A girl's ribbon was found tangled in the brush near the school, her mother recognizing the faded blue. A boy's slate, cracked and abandoned, bore scratches that looked like pleas. The Graysons brushed off questions with scripture or stern warnings, their authority unshaken. Yet the children who remained told stories in whispers, tales of locked rooms, of cries from below the floor, of lessons that left scars. The schoolhouse, once a beacon of hope, had become a house of horrors, its lessons written not in ink, but in blood. The town's trust was fraying, and the forest seemed to tighten its grip around the truth, as if guarding the Graysons' secrets for just a little longer. As winter tightened its hold on Willow Creek, the town's whispers grew into a quiet roar. The vanishings were no longer rumors but wounds, each missing child a fresh cut in the community's heart. 5 children gone in as many months, orphans at first, then others, their empty beds haunting their families. Parents gathered in barns and kitchens, their voices hushed over flickering candles. "My boy won't speak of the school," one father muttered, his hands trembling. "He wakes screaming but won't say why." A mother clutched her daughter's shawl, found torn near the woods, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The Graysons, explanations, runaways, distant relatives, felt hollow, their piety now a mask that fooled no one. Elijah's sermons grew fiercer, his words laced with warnings of divine judgment for those who doubted. Abigail's charity turned cold, her gifts paired with veiled threats. "Speak ill of us and God will know." Harlan and Silas became shadows in the town, their presence at the market or tavern enough to silence conversation. Yet the rumors swelled. A hunter, tracking deer near the school, swore he heard cries from beneath the ground, faint but unmistakable. A washerwoman found a child's shoe in the creek, its leather stained with something darker than mud. At night, strange lights flickered in the schoolhouse windows, long after the children should have gone home. Old Man Carter, who lived closest to the woods, spoke of chants drifting on the wind, words that didn't sound like any prayer he knew. Parents began to act. Josiah Reed, a farmer whose son vanished, marched to the school, pounding on the locked doors. Elijah met him with a glare, quoting scripture about false accusers. That night Josiah's barn burned to the ground, the flames licking the sky as neighbors watched in fear. The Graysons' influence held the town in a chokehold. Fear of their wrath, fear of their God, fear of what might happen if they pushed too hard. Still, some dared to search the woods, finding scraps of cloth, a broken slate, a doll with one eye missing, all pointing back to the school. The tension was a noose, tightening with each passing day. Mothers kept their children home, citing illness, but the Graysons sent Silas to their doors, his silence more threatening than words. The town was splitting, those too afraid to speak, and those whose grief outweighed their fear. Whispers turned to plans, hushed meetings in the dead of night. Something had to be done, but the schoolhouse loomed like a fortress, its secrets locked behind those heavy doors. The forest itself seemed complicit, its shadows hiding what the town was too scared to face. As the first snow fell, blanketing the paths to the school, the truth was closer than ever to breaking free. But at what cost? The truth burst open on a stormy night, when rain lashed the earth and lightning tore the sky. A group of parents, driven by desperation and fortified by whiskey, could wait no longer. Armed with axes and torches, they stormed the schoolhouse, their shouts drowned by thunder. The heavy doors splintered under their blows, revealing the darkened room within. The air was thick with the stench of damp earth and something fouler, decay, sharp and undeniable. Their torches cast flickering shadows, revealing empty desks and a cross hanging crookedly on the wall. But it was what lay beneath that shattered their resolve. In Elijah's study, hidden under a rug, they found a trap door, its edges worn from use. With trembling hands, they pried it open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was cold, heavy with the tang of blood and fear. The chambers below were a labyrinth of horror, earthen walls slick with moisture, bore stains that glistened red in the torchlight. Chains hung from bolts, some still holding scraps of cloth or hair. Crude tools littered the floor, whips frayed from use, irons branded with crosses, a knife, crusted with rust or worse. In one corner, a pile of small bones lay scattered, some so tiny they could only belong to children. A tattered doll stared blankly from the dirt, its button eyes reflecting the flickering light. Belongings littered the rooms, a boy's cap, a girl's ribbon, a slate with a half-scratched plea for help. The parents gagged, some falling to their knees, as the truth hit like a blow. This was no school. It was a slaughterhouse, where the Graysons' twisted lessons ended in death. Children deemed unredeemable were brought here, subjected to rituals masked as purification, beatings that broke bones, starvation that stole breath, and experiments in pain that left no survivors. The chambers told a story of years of horror. Journals, hidden in a crate, detailed Elijah's madness, pages scrawled with rants about cleansing sin, each death a sacrifice to God. Estimates suggested dozens of victims, their bodies buried in the woods or burned to ash. The parents wept, their torches trembling as they realized how long the Graysons had preyed on their trust. The schoolhouse, built for enlightenment, had been a lair for monsters, its locked doors hiding a legacy of blood. As they climbed back, to the surface the storm raged on, but the real tempest was brewing in their hearts. The Graysons could no longer hide, and the town would never be the same. The storm that had torn open the schoolhouse's secrets gave way to a gray, heavy dawn, as if the sky itself mourned Willow Creek's shattered trust. The hidden chambers beneath the school, with their blood-stained walls and scattered bones, had stripped away the Graysons' veneer of piety. The town, once bound by fear, now burned with a quiet fury. The sheriff, Amos Ward, a man whose pockets had long been warmed by Elijah Grayson's coin, could no longer hide behind excuses. His face was pale as he led the posse to the Grayson cabin, his boots sinking into the mud as if the earth resisted his purpose. Torches flickered in the morning mist, their light casting long shadows across the frostbitten ground. Elijah was dragged from his bed, his wrists bound in iron, his eyes blazing with a defiance that chilled the men around him. Abigail followed, her voice a shrill wail, cursing the town with prophecies of divine retribution. Harlan and Silas, the broad-shouldered sons, struggled against their chains, their silence more menacing than shouts. Eliza, the youngest, crumpled to the floor, her sobs echoing as the door slammed shut behind her. The family that had ruled Willow Creek through fear and scripture now faced the judgment of those they'd betrayed. The town square transformed into a makeshift courtroom, its wooden platform creaking under the weight of grief and rage. Lanterns hung from posts, their flames dancing in the cold air as the townsfolk gathered in a circle that felt more like a noose. Survivors stepped forward, their voices trembling but resolute. A boy named Caleb, barely 10, stood clutching his mother's hand, his eyes hollow as he described nights chained in the school's basement, fed scraps through a slot like an animal. His small frame shook as he recounted the sound of Elijah's ruler cracking against bone, the stench of damp earth mingling with his own fear. A girl, Mary Cole, whispered of Eliza's cruelty, how the young woman would force confessions of invented sins, her soft voice twisting words into knives that cut deeper than any blade. Parents held up relics of their lost children. A blue ribbon, frayed and mud-stained, a tiny shoe, its leather cracked, a slate with a half-scratched word that might have been help. Each item was a wound, each testimony a spark that fed the crowd's anger. The air grew thick with their collective pain, the wind carrying whispers of justice like a prayer. Elijah's journals, found in the chambers, were read aloud by the town clerk, a man whose voice faltered with every page. The scrawled words revealed a mind unhinged, children's deaths framed as sacrifices to cleanse impurity, their suffering a twisted offering to a vengeful God. The weak must be purged, Elijah had written, his handwriting jagged as if carved with a blade. The crowd gasped, some clutching rosaries, others spitting curses into the dirt. Mothers wept openly, their sobs mingling with the creak of the platform. Fathers clenched their fists, their knuckles white, as they realized how many children, dozens, perhaps more, had been stolen over the years, their bodies buried in unmarked graves or burned to ash in the woods. The Graysons sat in chains, their faces a gallery of defiance and despair. Elijah met every accusation with scripture, his voice booming as he called the townsfolk sinners for judging him. Abigail's prayers turned to rants, her eyes wild, her hands clawing at the air as if summoning some dark force to save her. Harlan and Silas glared at the crowd, their broad shoulders squared, unrepentant to the last. Only Eliza showed cracks, her face pale, her lips trembling as she whispered pleas no one heeded. The trials dragged on for weeks, each day a fresh wound. The town hall, a modest building of weathered planks, became a crucible where truth battled lies. Witnesses came forward with stories that grew darker with each telling. A girl who saw her brother dragged to the basement, never to return. A boy who escaped a special session by hiding in the woods, his dreams haunted by screams. The Graysons' defense was a tapestry of scripture and manipulation, but the evidence was undeniable. Bones in the chambers, blood on the tools, and the journal's damning words. The verdict came swiftly, unanimous, death by hanging. The gallows were built in the square, their timbers hauled from the very woods that had hidden the Graysons' crimes. On a misty morning, as fog curled around the town like ghostly fingers, the executions began. Elijah went first, his final words a curse upon Willow Creek, cut short as the rope snapped tight. Abigail followed, her screams fading to a gurgle, her body swaying in the damp air. Harlan and Silas were hanged together, their defiance snuffed out as the crowd held its breath. Eliza, the last, climbed the steps trembling, her voice a broken whisper begging for mercy. But the noose answered, its creak echoing like a final judgment. The town stood in silence as the rope swayed, the bodies casting long shadows across the square. Justice had been served, but it was a hollow victory. The Graysons were gone, their reign of terror ended, but the scars they left ran deep. Families returned to homes that felt emptier, their children's laughter replaced by echoes of loss. The schoolhouse stood abandoned, its silhouette a dark stain against the horizon. The townsfolk dispersed, their footsteps heavy, their hearts burdened by the truth. Yet even as the gallows were dismantled, a chill lingered in the air, as if the Graysons' malice had seeped into the very soil. Willow Creek would never be the same, its trust shattered, its innocence buried with the children it could not save. And in the quiet that followed, a new fear took root. What if the evil wasn't truly gone? The execution should have ended it. The Graysons were dead, their bodies buried in unmarked graves far from Willow Creek's churchyard, as if the town feared their very bones could taint sacred ground. But the schoolhouse remained, a rotting husk standing defiant against the passage of time. Its weathered planks sagged under the weight of vines, its windows gaped like empty sockets, and its doors creaked in the wind, as if whispering secrets no one dared to hear. The townsfolk avoided the path through the woods, their steps quickening as dusk fell, their eyes averted from the clearing where the school loomed. Children no longer played near its borders, and hunters steered clear, claiming the wolves themselves shunned the place. The forest seemed to guard it, its shadows thicker, its silence heavier, as if the trees themselves were complicit in what had happened there. Willow Creek tried to heal, to rebuild the trust shattered by the Graysons' crimes. But the schoolhouse stood as a reminder that some wounds never close. Whispers began to spread, soft at first, like leaves rustling in the night. Old Man Carter, whose cabin sat closest to the woods, swore he heard cries drifting from the schoolhouse. Children's voices, faint and pleading, carried on the wind. He'd sit by his fire, his hands trembling, telling anyone who'd listen about footsteps, pattering across empty floors. Though no one had entered the building in months, a washerwoman, fetching water from the creek, saw a flicker of light in the school's windows, like a candle moving through the dark. She dropped her pail and ran, her heart pounding as she swore she heard a child's laugh, sharp and unnatural. Young boys, daring each other to approach the schoolyard, returned pale, claiming they saw a small figure in the trees, pale with hollow eyes, vanishing when they blinked. The stories grew, each one darker than the last. A farmer found a slate. In the woods, its surface scratched with words that weren't English. as if written by a hand not entirely human. A mother passing the school at dusk felt a cold hand brush her arm, though no one was there. In the spring of 1815, a traveling preacher named Reverend Holt arrived in Willow Creek, his wagon laden with crosses and holy water. He'd heard of the Graysons' horrors and declared the schoolhouse cursed, a place where evil had taken root. The townsfolk, desperate for closure, gathered as he marched to the clearing, his Bible raised like a shield. He chanted prayers, his voice steady, at first sprinkling sage and salt across the threshold, but as he stepped inside, the air grew heavy, the temperature plunging despite the warm day. The ground trembled, a low rumble that shook the crowd. A wail rose from beneath the floorboards, not human, but something older, angrier, as if the school itself rejected the cleansing. Holt staggered out, his face ashen, his hands burned where he'd clutched his cross. "It's not gone," he whispered, his eyes wide. "It's in the walls, the earth, the air." The townsfolk fled, their prayers unanswered, the sage smoldering, in the dirt. The curse became a part of Willow Creek's soul. Years passed, and the schoolhouse decayed, its roof caving in, its walls crumbling like old bones. Yet, the stories never faded. A hunter lost in a storm sought shelter inside, only to emerge raving about shadows that moved without light, whispering his name. Children born after the Graysons' deaths spoke of dreams where pale figures beckoned from the woods, their voices promising secrets. The town tried to forget, building new schools, new homes, but the schoolhouse remained, untouched by axe or fire, as if protected by something unseen. Some said it was the Graysons' spirits, their malice bound to the place they'd defiled. Others believed the children's souls lingered, trapped in the chambers where they'd suffered, crying out for release. The forest grew wilder, its branches curling around the school like a cage, hiding it from the world but never erasing its presence. Willow Creek carried on, its people marked by a quiet dread. The schoolhouse stood as a warning, its silhouette, a scar against the sky. No one spoke of tearing it down, no one dared. The curse of the Graysons was more than a story. It was a living thing, woven into the town's fabric, a reminder that evil can wear the face of innocence. On moonless nights, when the wind howled through the woods, the cries still echoed, the footsteps still sounded, and the shadows still moved. The schoolhouse waited, patient and eternal, for those foolish enough to forget its lessons. What darkness lingers in places where trust was betrayed? And what happens when the past refuses to stay buried?